Welcome back. All right, so I've been seeing various hockey-related sites burning questions for each team as we get ready for the regular season. So yeah, I got some questions in the back of my mind when it comes to each team, and I'm going to try to write one word next to each team with a question mark because it's a question, not a statement of fact. Because if I write it as a statement of fact, people are going to skip to the end of the video and say, "I can't believe you're saying this about this team." Well, it's going to happen anyways, but at least I'll have the question mark there. So we'll start with Winnipeg. We'll go to Boston. I've got teams organized by division. Again, I'm going to try to keep this to one word. This is already my second take. This could take a while because it's not that easy. So to me, the question with Winnipeg is stale. And I say that because it's a term that's been thrown at the Winnipeg Jets from various people within the media that I've seen, and the question's been asked of the Jets. The Jets have said no, it's not a problem. But is it? Is this a team that failed to make the playoffs? There should have been bigger changes made, or is the faith shown in the roster by Kevin Cheveldayoff going to pay off? Are they going to end up finding themselves in a playoff spot? Because if they don't, that could reflect back then on the general manager, the decisions he made, and then maybe Cheveldayoff's job is at least in question by the end of the year. St. Louis, for me, there's one question I have with St. Louis. So even though I'm bullish on them making the playoffs and being one of the top teams in the Central, can Binnington in the regular season play the way he played in the playoffs last year? Binnington isn't really a favorite for the Vezina. He is, if you were making a list of top 10 goalies in the league, I don't think from a regular season perspective he's in those top 10. But in terms of a playoff money goaltender because of the 2019 Cup and because of how he played this past spring, I think he'd be in that conversation. But in order for St. Louis to get to the playoffs, the goaltending has to be good enough. I do have questions with Binnington. Moving on to Nashville. One question I have with them is who's going to be the backup? So they bring in Lankinen. They've also got Ingram, who's going to be the backup. They need a backup that can play 30 plus games. They need to be able to give Saros those nights off. Do they have a goaltender right now who can do that? Right? I don't know the answer to that. They have plenty of time in training camp to figure this out. Preseason as well. And the good news for Nashville is it does feel like there's goaltenders that could be available. The bad news would be they're probably going to be those third string goaltenders, guys who may be veterans looking for a new chance. So for Nashville, we'll see how the backup works for them. For Minnesota, with all of the issues with the salary cap clearly affecting what Bill Guerin's able to do this summer, and then the abrupt trading of Talbot after saying Talbot's under contract, he's a member of the Wild, realizing he had to do something because the agent said he had to do stuff, and then Guerin said, I don't have to do, and he swore, but he did. And now the question for me becomes one of, are the Minnesota Wild, who it felt like were in contention this past season, are they going to fall back? The Central Division is tough. I would say positions 2 through 5 could go in almost any order. Are they going to be 5? Could they end up being 6? Because again, I do wonder with the changes made in the offseason, does Minnesota still have that spot as a potential contender, or do we see them fall back a bit this year? Dallas, right now, there's only one question if you're a Dallas fan. Why Robertson's not signed? He's not signed. And while that's not a huge deal right before training camp, if he's not signed once we get to the start of the season, it will become more and more of a looming issue, especially for a team that has trouble scoring goals. Losing your number one goal scorer probably going to cause your goal scoring to drop. So that's the question mark I have with Robertson. For Colorado, Cup Hangover. The hangover is a real thing. Like the Stanley Cup hangover is definitely a real thing. It does happen where a team will win the Stanley Cup, and it can be hard to get motivated in those games in October and early November for a team that just won the Stanley Cup. So we'll see how Colorado's record looks by, I would say, around middle of November. I don't expect them to struggle mightily or anything, but we'll see if that Stanley Cup hangover shows up in the early season results. Hawks. Is this season going to be chaos? So the reason that chaos is the question I have for this is we know that Taves and Kane could be on their way out. And then what? Like, what do you do? Like, you've got Seth Jones now starting an 8-year contract. It's an expensive contract. What else is this team going to do now in order to save some money? What else might they do? And how far does that chaos go? Who is off limits right now for the Chicago Blackhawks? And how much are they willing to strip things down in order to potentially end up worst in the league? That being said, it feels like Arizona wanted to be last overall and didn't get there. Montreal beat them to it. So does Arizona end up being 32nd overall this year, or are things going to get better for the Arizona Coyotes? And again, they ended up getting more wins this past season than I think many of us had figured that they would, especially after that first month and a half. So are they going to follow through, and this year they're just going to be bad the whole way through the season? We'll find out. Now, moving over to the Metro. And again, these are reverse alphabetical. For anybody wondering why are they in the order they are, the reverse alphabetical order. So for Washington, the question I have with Washington entering the season is, can Ovechkin hit 50? If Ovechkin hits 50 again, I mean, we already know he's the best goal scorer in the history of the National Hockey League. At least I believe that. I know there's a lot of people that believe that. But if he gets 50 again, are we going to see more and more acknowledgement from those who are pretty entrenched in the idea that he's not the greatest goal scorer of all time? Are we going to see some movement, or does it not matter? Could Ovechkin get multiple seasons with 50 goals, and would it not matter? So, yeah, that's the question mark I have with the Caps. It comes down to Ovechkin more than anything. Pittsburgh, can they stay healthy? Injuries. Being able to stay healthy it feels like more and more important for Pittsburgh as that core has gotten older. And we may not have that ability to absorb the losses of Malkin, Crosby, etc., as they did last year. They fought really hard through injuries, but eventually they will bite you. And so we'll see whether or not Pittsburgh's able to stay healthy this season. It is a big question mark with both Crosby and Malkin. It's an important one. Philadelphia is a tough one, isn't it? Tire fire's not one word. Tortorella really isn't a question as much as it's an answer. We don't know if it's an answer to what, though. Yeah, that's not a one word question either. One word question for the Flyers. Bounce back? Can they? If Tortorella gets that locker room under control, gets everybody on the same page, can we see a resurgence of a Philadelphia Flyers team that's missed the playoffs 2 years in a row? And I think that's a fair question to ask. There are others as well. Again, tire fire, 2 words. Couldn't put it up there as one. But to me, bounce back, I think it's possible they have that this year. It's possible. You look at this team on paper. Again, if Sean Couturier can stay healthy, that's huge. They're not an awful team on paper, but it's just last season was so horrendous. And Tortorella coming in, they've added D'Angelo. There's all kinds of belief of, well, that's not necessarily going to stop the chaos. And so, yeah, well, chaos is the question for Chicago. For Philadelphia, to me, it's bounce back. New York Rangers. What does Igor do for an encore? Igor Shesterkin had one of the best seasons in recent memory for a goaltender, and was a huge reason the Rangers went as far as they did in the playoffs. And so what does he do for an encore? If this is really Igor, and I believe it is. To be honest, I believe that Shesterkin is that good. I don't think it was just one really good year. It's just you can't ignore the season that he just had. So I think he can have that encore performance. I think he can do it again. You guys can let me know in the comments section if you agree. The Islanders. So the question we have to ask right now with the Islanders, it could be stale, but for me the question with them is coaching. So now they've made the change behind the bench. Barry Trotz is out. Lane Lambert's in. Does that fix things? Lou Lamoriello is basically gambling that the roster that he had last year really wasn't a problem. and that it was coaching. And obviously there's other things to that as well, but he wanted to change the voice on the bench. Obviously this year's schedule is going to be a lot more friendly to the New York Islanders. Do we see the Islanders start to get better, in part due to the injury issue and not having that COVID shutdown? But could a change behind the bench be a big difference maker as well? So we'll keep an eye on whether or not their numbers stay the same as last year. They could. They absolutely could. This is a team that defensively really solid. Goaltending's excellent. Could use a few more goals. Maybe they have a bit more of an attack. New Jersey. I'll put up the word playoffs with a question mark. And I know there's Devil fans who believe they're ready for the playoffs right now. And I understand that, looking at their team on paper. It's a good team. I do wonder if they're a year away from playoffs. I do wonder if the good young core they've built up around guys like Hischier and Hughes, if that's going to take a little while longer. And that's okay if it does. There's still a lot of good young players coming up, and certainly this draft is fantastic, the 2023 draft. So if you miss the playoffs in 2023, that's a great consolation that you're likely going to get another pretty big name. And of course, if New Jersey ended up winning another draft lottery, well, that would cause some questions and whatnot, and then they'd get Bedard in all likelihood. But this is gonna be a really strong draft. So I do wonder, how long that focus is gonna be on playoffs. But certainly for Devils fans, that's the question. And then for Columbus, biggest question mark for Columbus. See, now it's into the biggest question mark, even though I'm going to talk about other things even after I get the biggest question mark. I'm gonna put a name up here. What does Johnny Gaudreau do? What does Johnny Gaudreau do in Columbus? Can he get back to 100 points in Columbus, a team that doesn't score as much as Calgary? Can he bring about that dynamic offense? Not only that, you've got Kent Johnson coming in. You've got a lot of young players in this lineup who might be ready to take that next step. Obviously, the goaltending has to maintain a pretty solid overall performance, or they're not going to make the playoffs. But yeah, for me, Gaudreau's the question, because in a new environment, you can never tell. There are certainly cases where Panarin comes to mind as a player who ends up really great. After he leaves Columbus, his numbers go up. But now we've got a player going to Columbus. What's going to happen there? And there are certainly cases with free agent signings that just hasn't worked. It just they go from being really, really good in one place to being good in another, or maybe a little bit mediocre, but just not living up to that contract. For Carolina, I'm going to put injuries. These are specifically meant for the goaltending. So while Pittsburgh, also a team that had problems with goaltenders getting hurt in the playoffs, it really hurt Carolina's chances. Freddie Anderson was not in the net for them. Antti Ranta gets hurt at times as well. They need those goaltenders to stay healthy. So the injuries for Carolina are more of a statement about goaltenders getting hurt, which goes back a long way to when they needed an emergency backup goaltender in a win over the Toronto Maple Leafs because two goalies got hurt in the same game. A very Carolina thing to happen. And so Kochetkov could end up getting into more games than we think at this point, right? All right, moving over to the West. Vegas. Cap. If Vegas is really going to get better, if Vegas is going to stay, in the hunt for the playoffs and all this, they have to get the salary cap situation fixed. It doesn't feel like it's fixed yet. It just doesn't. I know they picked up the Shea Weber contract, but we know at some point in time there's going to be a team that has a player that's on the outs, and Vegas will probably be attached to them. And so the question I have with Vegas, and this will go right through into next summer, how do they finally get that salary cap completely under control and make it so that it's not a problem going forward, right? It's been a problem for Vegas for years now. Vancouver. So a lot of questions are being asked about, the re-signing of JT Miller. And now there's questions about whether or not to sign Bo Horvat. I am of the mind that they should sign Bo Horvat and sign him to a long-term extension. He wants to stay. But now the question comes up, and this is a fair question about Vancouver's core. Is the core good enough to win games? I think they make the playoffs this year. There are others that think they make the playoffs, and there are others who think they won't. And you can make a persuasive argument for them being inside the playoffs as well as a persuasive argument for them being outside the playoffs. And the difference seems to be those who view the team as a playoff team believe in the core, and those who don't see the Canucks as a playoff team do not believe in the core. Whether it's a not a belief in Brock Besser's ability to stay healthy or produce, questions about Bo Horvat and his ability to lead, questions about if Miller has that drop back in production, which most of us expect, who takes those extra points. Can Podkolzin take that next step? Is Kuzmenko going to work? Is Mikheyev overpaid? A lot of questions, right? Hughes, does he play defense? OEL's contract, do they keep it? And can Demko follow up what was a great year with another great year? The answer to those questions, there's some yeses and some nos I would have in there, but it really comes back to, is the core going to be good enough? And I think this season will tell us. San Jose, rebuild with a question mark, because San Jose intends to push for a playoff spot. And that's fine. You know, it's fine. We do see teams surprisingly make the playoffs every year. Maybe San Jose does. But if San Jose does that hurt their team more long term? Does that mean that Mike Grier might go out at the deadline and say, you know, we're close, we're in a playoff spot, and then maybe move future assets or a draft pick in order to try to shore things up? Knowing that a lot of the core players, whether it's Carlson, whether it's Couture, some of these core guys are older, and you want to strike while the iron's hot. So in the event that this team flames out from the start of the season, I think they'll have to admit they have to do a rebuild, but they're not really feeling that right now. For Seattle, it's a longer word, but improvement. They have to show some kind of an improvement this year over that 60-point season. Just were not good enough. They weren't good enough in any area of the game. And I understand expansion team, and I've said that myself. You know, this was an expansion team that didn't get some of the sweetheart deals that Vegas did when they came in, and that definitely affected Seattle. But this is the year where I think they have to show some improvement. And I'm not just talking about like going from 60 points to 65. I'm talking about like 75, 80 points. I think they have a lineup that can do it, but they have to get that bounce back from the defense and the goaltending and in order to achieve that improvement. LA, why not be provocative? So, is there a chance LA, with the upward momentum they have, could they end up being a dark horse for first place in that division? I think there's a lot of picks for them to be in the playoffs. Totally agree. I think the Kings should get into the playoffs. But could they end up finishing first? There really isn't a juggernaut in this division. It was Vegas. Right now it looks like it should be Edmonton. But Edmonton was played pretty tight by the LA Kings in that 7-game series. It was good. And for the Flames, they had their struggles in that first round against Dallas before they get knocked out in the second round by Edmonton. Yes, the Kings, I think, are a dark horse for first place in that division. And it really is going to depend on Jonathan Quick or Cal Peterson. If Peterson has that bounce back season, great. But that's going to be interesting. Oilers, you know what? The question mark for me with the Oilers is Evander Kane. And it's not a question of whether or not he can score. I have no doubt that Evander Kane can score. I have no doubt he could score 40, 45, 50, playing on a line with McDavid or Draisaitl or both. But can Kane keep his nose clean for a full season? Can he not be in the headlines for the wrong reasons? Can he manage to go a whole season without any kind of controversies, without any problems, without anybody scratching their heads and saying, now why would he say a thing like that? Can we have that season? It would be nice to see that. Be nice to see nothing bad happening around Evander Kane. And I mean, on the ice, off the ice, anything, right? Just a really good, squeaky clean season from Kane. Calgary. So the Flames have made changes in the offseason, a lot. And they were necessitated by Gaudreau and Tkachuk moving on. In the event that Tkachuk was willing to stay in Calgary, in the event that Gaudreau had stuck around, we might be talking about maybe a little bit of a stale, they kept everything together, is it going to be good enough kind of feeling. But now the question becomes, with so many newbies in the lineup, The good news being Chris Tanev, they announced today, is going to be ready for the start of training camp. I love Chris Tanev. His heart is absolutely just fantastic. Miss him in Vancouver. But there's still a question I have when it comes to the chemistry. The chemistry up front. You've got new lines working together. It can take a while, and there's times where that chemistry just isn't there. So that'll be interesting to see how long it takes for them to build that chemistry. Anaheim. Now playoffs are a little bit far off. So I'll just put better. The Anaheim Ducks, I picked them to finish last in the division. I've mentioned in other videos since then, it's not that I think Anaheim's going to be bad. I think the Pacific's going to be pretty good. And I think Anaheim's going to be decent. I just don't think that we're going to see teams in the Pacific with point totals as low as the 60 that were put out by the Seattle Kraken. I think we'll see more of a balance there, which means some of the ridiculous totals teams put up last year would come down too. I don't think we'll see. I'm hoping we don't see 13 teams with 100 or more points this year. I'd like to see it down into more of the 8-9 teams, because then teams at the bottom will have better numbers as well. It's just more interesting when there's more teams that are competitive. So I do expect Anaheim should probably be better. I don't know how much. I don't know how much we expect from Klingberg. I don't know how much these new additions are going to work, and how much these new additions, like a guy like Klingberg, would be then used to flip at the deadline for other future assets. I think Pat Verbeek realizes this team isn't where he wants it to be yet. It's about getting there. All right, now we come into the Atlantic, the Toronto Maple Leafs. One word, 7. Why? They don't win Game 7s. The Toronto Maple Leafs have had a really huge problem winning Game 7s. There's 2 ways to deal with this. One, win it in Game 6. Win a series in Game 6. Don't worry about Game 7. And 2, go out there, find whatever it is, whether it's an actual issue with some players, or whether it's, right between the years, it's this psychological thing. And I really do think a lot of it's psychological with Toronto at this point. They have to show that they can get over the hump. I mean, we can have the questions about whether or not Matthews is going to improve his goals beyond 60. Can he hit 70? Sure, he could hit 70. But if they lose in the first round, it's not going to be a big deal. It's just going to be, it's great Matthews got those goals, and immediately thereafter, people saying, yeah, but what happened in the playoffs? So they really, at this point, I don't think the regular season means much of anything with Toronto. Although, if I didn't rank them in the power rankings, there would be some upset people on the internet. Tampa Bay. I'll throw this out there because I know there's people who already believe that Tampa Bay is a dynasty and there's a whole modern day. But in the official annals of the National Hockey League, the last dynasty was the Edmonton Oilers, who won 5 cups in 7 years. And since then, teams have not reached that 3 cups in 4 years record. That is for an official dynasty. We can talk about changing what it means to be a dynasty, but it hasn't been changed. And if Tampa Bay wins it this year, that would silence a lot of people. Not everybody. There would still be they were $86 million over the cap. Oh, they beat up my grandmother. That's how they won that Stanley Cup. Whatever you want to say, however you want to put it. Tampa Bay are the villains. I'm not going to say anything bad about that. But yeah, if they win that 3rd cup in 4 years, they'd be a dynasty. Do they have enough gas left in the tank? They've played a lot of extra hockey, like a ton. They've played almost a season extra worth of hockey with playoffs over the last few years. And it adds up. It absolutely adds up, and it takes its toll. It's more physical, it's more difficult, and it definitely is something that takes its toll and can lead to teams stumbling the next year. So we'll see if they're there. You know what? Ottawa, it's all hype right now, isn't it? Ottawa is the team. Everybody loves Ottawa right now. Everybody's so excited to see what Ottawa does this year. I'm excited too. I am. But I was excited going into last season. A little bit. In that I thought, they're going to get better. And then they didn't. They were brutal in October and November. And so, can they live up to the hype this year? I love the additions they made. I think Giroux, DeBrincat is 2 examples, I should say, of just great moves made by Pierre Dorian. And so, can they live up to the hype, right? It's going to be quite the season. Montreal. goaltending. If I had a question mark with Montreal, it's the goaltending. No offense to Jake Allen. I think Jake Allen's good. Montembeault had a rough year. They cannot have Primo being up when he's not ready, which it felt like was the case this past season. Primo really had his struggles. The funny thing is, with Marty St. Louis behind the bench, I think Montreal's going to be able to score some goals. I think Montreal's going to be fun to watch. But the question then becomes, how are they going to keep the puck out of the net? So we may see a Montreal team this year that loses a bunch of games 6-4. It could be very entertaining to watch. They've got Caulfield, they've got Suzuki, they picked up Dodonov in the offseason. Dodonov, we know, can score goals. Slavkovsky could be joining this roster. Does he pick it up right away? And if he does, how many goals does he get? So I think the goal scoring should be entertaining and should keep Montreal games fun. The goaltending, the defense might be a little bit of an issue there. We'll see how Matheson fits in for them. But yeah, goaltending to me is the question mark. Florida. Same as LA, but from a different perspective. So does Florida this year, do they floor it and go all out to be first again? Florida, clearly last year, they absolutely wanted to win every single game. And I'm not questioning the competitiveness of any player in the National Hockey League. Obviously, players don't go out on the ice thinking, man, I can't wait to lose this and go have a beer. So the idea that a team would go all out to win every game sounds like a head scratcher, but it's different. It's different when you see a team that's just giving absolutely everything in the third period, down 3-1, and they're going and going. And it felt like Florida, I can't prove they ran out of gas in round 2, but they just didn't seem to have it, right? And so I would look for them to hold back a little bit this year. I don't think they're going to be first in the division. I talked about that when I did the projections for this year. And I really think they're going to take it a little bit easier because you're better off to be second or third in your division, second or third in your conference, and win the Stanley Cup than win the conference, win the President's Trophy, and lose in round 1 or round 2. Detroit, question mark that I have for New Jersey is the same here. Playoffs. Detroit has a lot of the pieces in place right now that were acquired by Steve Yzerman through draft, through trade, through free agency. This is a pretty good team. This is absolutely going to be a pretty good team. And you've got Husso, you've got Perron added, you've got some pretty good lineup adjustments everywhere. If Edvinsson comes in this year and he can play right out of the gate, that's going to make things even better. But playoffs for Detroit are a question mark. Notice this playoffs with Detroit and it's hype for Ottawa. Just the hype around Ottawa is ridiculous. Playoffs feels like it's an incremental improvement for Detroit, and maybe that's the next step. Buffalo. So Owen Power came in this year and looked fantastic. He really did. He only played 8 games, but he looked really good. I watched those games. He looked like a veteran, didn't seem out of place. So is this the year that Rasmus Dahlin, who was drafted first overall, takes that next step and gets himself into the conversation for the Norris Trophy? Is this the year where he gets 60, 65 points, plays really well defensively? Is that going to happen with Dahlin? Because I've seen comments about, well, he's overrated, he wasn't that great. Well, you know, he hasn't really, I don't know, maybe he'll end up being a bust. I've seen some of those comments. I would disagree with any of those comments. But Dahlin, considering the amount of hype he had when he was drafted, he hasn't reached the level yet that hype would have indicated. So is this the year that he really hits the next level? And keep in mind, Buffalo themselves should be a more competitive team. That should bring some of his totals up. So we'll see. Boston. Out's the question I have with Boston for a simple reason. The expectation this year is that somebody in the East might fall back. Most are picking the Bruins, including myself. The interesting thing is last year, during the regular season, Boston was the sexy pick as the team was going to drop out. But I never once bought that because they had a very good record. And there were so many points between themselves and the team that was below the playoff line that I didn't see any reason to be concerned. But they were the pick last year as the team that should fall off, and maybe in the second half they'll fall off. They didn't. But it does feel like with the injuries, combined with the fact this team's older, and just it just feels like if there's a team in the East that could fall back, it feels like it's going to be Boston, although there are some picking Washington as the team that falls back. And, of course, crazy enough, I've seen sports forecasters say Florida's going to fall out of the playoffs. So I think that's, honestly, if they end up being correct, they should have that right on the cover of next year's annual. It should just be, hey, we predicted this, nobody else did. There you go. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. What's the biggest question you have with the team you follow, or the biggest question you have for any of these 32 teams? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll talk to you again soon.